The Galactic Council had sent their warning 3 times before humans even loaded their colony ships, and the message was always the same. Do not settle on Theta 7. The planet belongs to the Shadowmanes, and the Shadowmanes belong to death itself. But humans never listened to warnings. They heard them, and they nodded, and they did whatever they wanted anyway. The first colony ship landed on Theta 7. On a bright morning, when the twin suns painted the sky in shades of gold and purple. 300 families stepped onto alien soil and looked around at the forests of black trees, and the mountains that touched the clouds, and the rivers that ran silver under strange light. They saw paradise. They did not see the eyes watching them from the darkness. Between the trees, the Shadowmanes were patient hunters. They had killed every species that tried to take their world. The Valorians had come with armies, and the Shadowmanes ate them. The Krath had come with weapons that could crack mountains, and the Shadowmanes ate them too. The creatures were 12 feet tall when fully grown, with bodies built from pure muscle and black fur that drank light like water. Their claws could tear through starship metal, and their eyes glowed like dying stars. But for 3 years, the Shadowmanes did not attack the human colony. Scientists could not explain it. The military commanders stayed nervous and kept their weapons ready. The politicians argued about whether this peace would last. Hannah Park did not care about any of that. She was 14 when her family landed on Theta 7, and she was 17 now, and she had better things to do than listen to adults argue. She had a whole planet to explore. Her father, David Park, was the colony lead xenobiologist, which meant he spent his days studying alien life forms and his nights worrying about his daughter. Hannah had her mother's spirit, he always said. Her mother had died on the journey to Theta 7, a sickness that the medical team could not cure, so David raised Hannah alone and watched her grow into someone brave and stubborn and absolutely impossible to control on. The morning that changed everything, Hannah woke before dawn and packed her bag with food and water and a small knife that her father did not know she had. She left a note on the kitchen table that said, "Gone hiking back before dark," and she slipped out into the purple twilight. Northern Ridge was off limits to colonists. The council had declared it Shadowmane territory after a survey team reported seeing a den there. But Hannah had been watching the ridge for months. She had seen shapes moving up there, and she wanted to know more. The climb took 3 hours, and by the time Hannah reached the top, the twin suns had risen fully, and sweat dripped down her face. She stopped to drink water, and that was when she heard the sound. It was small and weak and desperate. A cry that sounded almost like a kitten, but deeper and rougher. Hannah followed the sound. The den was hidden behind a pile of fallen rocks, and Hannah had to squeeze through a narrow gap to find it. Inside, the darkness was thick, but her eyes adjusted slowly, and what she saw made her heart stop. 3 Shadowmane cubs huddled together in the back of the cave. They were small by Shadowmane standards, maybe 4 feet tall, with fur that was more gray than black, and eyes that had not yet learned to glow. They were shaking and crying and pressing against each other for warmth, and in front of them, blocking half the cave, was the body of their mother. The adult Shadowman had been crushed by a rock slide. Her massive form lay still and cold, and the cubs kept pushing against her with their noses, trying to wake her up. They did not understand that she was never going to wake up. Hannah should have run. She knew that. Her brain screamed at her to turn around and go home and report this to the authorities. But her legs would not move, and her eyes would not look away from those 3 small creatures crying for their dead mother. She thought about her own mother dying in a cold medical bay while Hannah held her hand. Slowly, Hannah sat down on the cave floor. Cubs noticed her immediately. Their crying stopped, and they pressed back against the wall. Their small claws extended, and their baby teeth showed in warning growls. They were terrified and ready to fight, even though they were just children. Hannah did not move. She did not speak. She just sat there and breathed slowly and waited. 1 hour passed, 2 hours, Past the smallest cub was the first to move. It crept forward on shaking legs, sniffing the air. Its siblings hissed warnings, but the small one kept coming closer and closer until its nose was almost touching. Hannah's Hannah stayed still. The cub sniffed her for a long time. Then it collapsed. Hannah realized with horror that the cubs were starving. Their mother had probably been dead for days, and they did not know how to hunt yet. They were going to die in this cave next to her body, moving very slowly. Hannah reached into her bag and pulled out the dried meat she had packed for her hike. She held a piece out toward the fallen cub. The other two cubs growled. Hannah waited. After what felt like forever, the smallest cub lifted its head and sniffed the meat. Its eyes went wide with hunger, and it snatched the food from Hannah's hand and swallowed it whole. Then it looked at her and made a sound. Was almost like a question. Hannah gave it more meat. By the time the sun started setting, all three cubs had eaten everything in Hannah's bag, and they were no longer growling at her. The smallest one had actually fallen asleep with its head on her leg. The other two watched her with curious eyes that held no more fear. Hannah named them in her mind. The smallest one, who had trusted her first, would be Ghost. The one with darker fur and fierce eyes would be Storm. The one who had held back the longest, watching and thinking, would be Ember. When Hannah finally stood to leave, the cubs stood too. When she walked toward the cave entrance, they followed. When she squeezed through the gap in the rocks, they squeezed through after her. She turned to look at them in the fading light. Three orphaned apex predators, the children of creatures that had killed thousands, stood before her waiting. Hannah should have told them to go back. She should have run. She should have done anything except what she did. But she thought about her mother again, about being alone, about having no one. She started walking home. The cubs followed. David Park was standing on the porch when his daughter came up the road, and his relief at seeing her alive turned to absolute terror when he saw what walked behind her. He grabbed Hannah and pulled her into the house and slammed the door, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold her. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What did you do?" But the cubs did not attack. They sat outside the door and waited, and when David finally looked out the window hours later, they were still there, curled up together, sleeping peacefully. That was the first night. Over the following weeks, the colony went into chaos. Emergency meetings were held. Scientists argued. Military officers demanded the cubs be killed. Politicians shouted about danger and liability and interstellar law. But no one could agree on what to do, because nothing like this had ever happened before. The cubs would not leave. They slept outside Hannah's window every night. They followed her to school and waited outside until she was done. They growled at anyone who raised their voice near her, but they never attacked. They let Hannah touch them and feed them. And eventually, they even let her father approach, though they always watched him carefully. Ambassador Talveen of the Valorians arrived 3 months later, demanding to see the girl who had tamed Shadowmanes. But when he watched Hannah playing with the cubs in the colony square, throwing a ball that they chased like puppies, he realized that tamed was the wrong word. She had not tamed them. They had chosen her, and that was something the galaxy had never seen before. Ambassador Talveen had lived for 300 years, and in that time, he had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched stars die and new worlds be born. He had stood before councils that decided the fate of billions, and he had never once felt the cold grip of fear wrap around his 4 hearts until he came to Theta 7. His shuttle descended through clouds that glowed pink in the light of the twin suns, and through his window he could see the human colony spread out below. It was small. By galactic standards, just a few thousand structures clustered around a central square, with farms and research stations spreading outward like the spokes of a wheel. Nothing impressive, nothing threatening, but somewhere down there a human child walked with Shadowmanes at her side. Talveen was Valorian, which meant his body was tall and thin with skin that shifted colors based on his emotions. Right now his skin was pale blue, the color of deep unease. His species had tried to colonize Theta 7 2 centuries ago. They had sent their finest warriors armed with weapons that could level cities. The Shadowmanes had killed them all in 3 days, every soldier, every scientist, every colonist. Valorians had never returned to Theta 7. They had marked it on their star maps with a symbol that meant Death World, and they had warned every other species to stay away. Now humans lived there, and not only did they live there, but one of their children had apparently made friends with the very creatures that had slaughtered his people. Director Michelle Torres met him at the landing pad. She was a short woman with gray hair and tired eyes, and she walked with the confident stride of someone who had handled too many crises to be impressed by one more ambassador. She said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture, "We have been expecting you, Tal." Veen had studied human customs enough to know he should shake her hand, but he could not stop his skin from flickering yellow with anxiety. "Where is she?" he asked. The girl with the Shadowman's Mitchell sighed. "The whole galaxy wants to see Hannah Park. We've had 17 requests for interviews in the last month alone. 3 corporations have offered to buy her contract as if she's some kind of product. The Krath Syndicate sent a very politely worded threat demanding we hand her over, and what has been your response?" Michelle looked at him with hard eyes. "She's a 17-year-old kid. She's not a weapon or a product or a curiosity. She's a girl who found some orphaned animals and decided to take care of them." Talveen wanted to laugh, but he was too unsettled. "Animals," he repeated. "Those animals killed my entire species' expeditionary force. 2,000 Valorians dead in 3 days, and you call them animals." "I call them what Hannah calls them," Michelle said. "She calls them Storm and Ember and Ghost. She calls them her family." The walk to the central square took 10 minutes, and with every step Talveen felt his unease. Grow humans walked past him, going about their daily lives as if nothing was unusual. Children played in the streets. Merchants sold goods from small stalls. Someone was cooking meat over an open fire, and the smell drifted through the air. These people lived on a death world, and they acted like it was just another colony. Then he saw her. Hannah Park sat on a bench near a fountain, reading something on a tablet. She looked completely ordinary, dark hair pulled back in a messy tail, clothes stained with dirt and grass, a backpack at her feet stuffed with books and tools. She could have been any teenage girl on any human world, except for the 3 massive predators lying around her. The Shadowmanes had grown in the months since Hannah had found them. They were nearly full size, now close to 12 feet when standing. Their black fur absorbed the sunlight, and their claws were as long as Talveen's forearm. Their eyes glowed faintly, even in daylight, a soft amber that tracked every movement in the fine square, and they were completely relaxed. One of them, the one with lighter patches that Talveen assumed was Ghost, had its head in Hannah's lap, while she absently scratched behind its ears. Another dozed in the sun, its massive chest rising and falling with slow breaths. The third sat upright, watching the crowd, but its posture was calm, almost lazy. A human child walked up to Hannah and asked her something. Talveen could not hear the words, but he saw Hannah smile and nod. The child then did something that made Talveen's skin turn white with shock. The child reached out and petted Ghost on the nose. The Shadowmane made a rumbling sound that might have been a purr and closed its eyes. The child giggled and ran back to her parents, who watched with the casual attention of people who had seen this scene 100 times before. "How?" Talveen whispered. "How is this possible?" Michelle stood beside him, watching the scene with something like pride in her eyes. "We have been asking ourselves the same question. Our scientists have studied Hannah and the cubs extensively. They have measured brain waves and hormone levels and behavioral patterns. They have written reports that fill entire databases, and what do those reports say? They say that Shadowmanes are pack animals. They bond with family units and protect them with absolute loyalty. When Hannah found those cubs, they were orphaned and starving and terrified. She could have killed them or captured them or run away. Instead, she sat with them. She fed them. She showed them that she was not a threat. She became their pack. Talveen watched as Hana stood up stretching. The three Shadowmanes rose with her, moving in perfect synchronization. When she walked, they walked. When she stopped, they stopped. Their eyes never left her, and their bodies were always positioned to protect her from any angle. "This is not taming," he said slowly. "This is not control, no." Michelle agreed. "This is love." The word hit Talveen like a physical blow. His species did not have a direct translation for the human concept of love. They had loyalty, and they had duty, and they had biological bonding. But this thing that humans called love, this fierce, irrational connection that made them do impossible things, he was beginning to understand why the galaxy feared humanity. That evening, Talveen requested a private meeting with Hana. She agreed to see him in the colony research center, a quiet building where her father worked. The Shadowmanes came with her, of course, padding silently through the halls like enormous shadows. Hana sat across from him at a table and looked at him with curious eyes that held no fear. She was just a child, but there was something ancient in her gaze, something that reminded Talveen of the old warriors from his people's legends. "You want to know how I did it?" she said. It was not a question, yes, Talveen admitted. "My people tried for decades to find a way to coexist with Shadowmanes. We studied them. We tried to communicate with them. We even attempted to raise cubs from birth. Nothing worked. They always attacked." Hana was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "Did you ever just sit with them? I do not understand. When I found Storm and Ember and Ghost, they were scared and alone. And they had just watched their mother die. I could have done a lot of things. I could have called for help or tried to capture them or defended myself. But instead I just sat down and waited. I showed them that I wasn't going to hurt them. I let them come to me on their own terms." "That seems too simple." Maybe Hana shrugged. "Maybe you were all trying too hard. You wanted to control them or study them or use them for something. But they are not tools. They are living creatures with feelings and thoughts and fears. All they wanted was someone to trust." She reached down and Storm pressed its massive head against her palmy. "Did not try to tame them," she said softly. "I just tried to be their friend." Talveen looked at the enormous predator nuzzling the hand of a teenage girl, and he felt something shift in his understanding of the universe. Humans were not special because they were strong or smart or technologically advanced. They were special because they could love anything, and somehow that love was returned. He was still thinking about this when the first Krath warship dropped out of hyperspace above the colony. The alarms started screaming at midnight. Hana woke to the sound of explosions and the red flash of emergency lights painting her bedroom walls. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, but then Storm burst through her door, followed by Ember and Ghost, and the fear in their glowing eyes told her this was real. She could hear her father shouting downstairs and the sound of weapons fire in the distance. Through her window, she saw lights falling from the sky like burning stars, and wherever they landed, flames erupted. The Krath had come. Everyone in the colony knew about the Krath Syndicate. They were slavers and raiders and killers who moved through the galaxy taking whatever they wanted. They had been banned from civilized space, but they did not care about laws. They cared about profit, and they had heard about the human girl who commanded Shadowman Ashana was worth more than the entire colony combined. David burst into her room and grabbed her arm. "We have to go," he said, and his voice was shaking. "There are shelters in the Eastern District. We can hide there until help arrives. What about everyone else?" Hana asked. Her father did not answer, and she understood help was not coming. The colony was too far from any military base, and the Krath would be gone long before anyone could respond. They were alone. The streets were chaos when they stepped outside. Families ran in every direction, screaming and crying. Colony security officers tried to maintain order, but there were not enough of them, and the Krath dropships kept falling from the sky. Each one carried a dozen soldiers in black armor with weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Hana saw Mrs. Patterson, the woman who ran the bakery, get cut down by plasma fire. She saw the school where she had spent 3 years learning and growing burst into flames. She saw children being dragged toward transport ships while their parents screamed and fought and died. Storm growled beside her, and the sound was unlike anything Hannah had heard before. It was deep and terrible and full of rage. The other cubs answered with growls of their own, and their eyes shifted from amber to burning crimson. They wanted to fight, but David kept pulling Hannah forward. "Keep moving," he begged. "Just keep moving. We have to get to safety." They made it to the shelter just as a craft patrol turned onto their street. David shoved Hannah through the door and slammed it behind them. The shelter was packed with colonists huddled together in the dim. Emergency lighting. Children cried into their parents' shoulders, and old people prayed to gods from a dozen different worlds. Captain Brian Hayes stood at the front of the room trying to organize a defense. He was a tall man with a scarred face and steady hands, and he had served in 3 wars before retiring to Theta 7. His eyes found Hannah and the Shadowmanes, and something like hope flickered across his face. "Miss Park," he said, "can your friends fight?" Before Hannah could answer, an explosion rocked the shelter. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the lights flickered. The Krath had found them. "Everyone get back," Captain Hayes shouted. He raised his rifle and pointed it at the door. "We hold them here as long as we can." David pulled Hannah behind him, shielding her with his body. The other colonists pressed against the walls, some of them holding improvised weapons, and all of them looking at the door with terror in their eyes. The door exploded. Inward. Krath soldiers poured through, firing their weapons in all directions. Captain Hayes shot 2 of them before a plasma bolt caught him in the chest, and he fell. Another colonist screamed and charged with a metal pipe, and he died just as quickly. The shelter filled with smoke and the sound of death. Then a massive shape moved through the chaos. Storm hit the first Krath soldier like a missile. Its claws tore through black armor like paper, and its jaws closed around the soldier's helmet with a crunch that echoed through the room. The other Krath turned their weapons toward the Shadowmane, but Ember was already among them, spinning and slashing and painting the walls with alien blood. Ghost lived up to its name. It seemed to disappear into the shadows, only to reappear behind enemy lines, striking from angles that should have been impossible. One moment a Krath soldier was aiming at David and Hannah. The next moment, Ghost was there, and the soldier was in 2 pieces on the floor. In less than a minute, every Krath soldier in the shelter was dead. The colonists stared in shock at the carnage around them. The cubs stood in the middle of the room, their fur matted with blood and their eyes still burning crimson. They were breathing hard, and their muscles trembled with adrenaline, but they did not move. They were waiting. Hannah stepped out from behind her father and walked toward her cubs. The colonists gasped, and some of them reached for her, trying to pull her back, but she ignored them. She walked right up to Storm and placed her hand on its blood-soaked muzzle. The Shadowmane made a soft sound and pressed against her palm. Its eyes slowly faded from crimson back to amber. "Good," she whispered. "You did good." David watched his daughter standing among 3 apex predators that had just killed a dozen armed soldiers, and he understood something that he had been trying to deny for months. Hannah was not a normal girl anymore. She was something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before. She was a bridge between humanity and the monsters they feared. More explosions sounded outside, and the screaming had not stopped. The Krath were still out there, still killing and capturing and destroying. But now Hannah had seen what her cubs could do, and she had seen what the raiders were doing to her home. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, who had given her free cookies every week. She thought about the children being dragged to slave ships. She thought about everyone who would die tonight while she hid in the shelter. Hannah, David's voice cracked. "Please don't." But she was already walking toward the ruined door. The cubs fell into formation around her, their bodies tense and ready. Storm on her left, Ember on her right. Ghost fading into shadows behind Theme. Colonist grabbed her arm. "You can't go out there. You will die." Hannah looked at the man's hand until he released her. Then she looked at the people around her, at their fear and their despair, and their hopelessness stay. Here, she said, keep everyone safe. What are you going to do another? Woman asked. Hana did not answer. She stepped through the door and into the burning night. The cubs followed, their eyes already shifting back to crimson, their claws extending their hunting instincts. Awakening behind her, David tried to follow, but Captain Hayes, despite his wound, grabbed him and held him back. Led her go, the captain said through gritted teeth. I have seen that look before. It is the look of someone who has stopped running. But she is my daughter, David sobbed. Hayes watched the girl and her monsters disappear into the smoke and fire and darkness. She's more than that. Now, he said, she is their only hope. Hana walked through the ruins of her home, and with every step her fear burned away, replaced by something harder, something colder. She had spent 3 years loving her cubs, protecting them, teaching them, showing them that humans could be trusted. Now it was time for them to protect in return. She stopped in the middle of the main street, where flames painted everything in shades of orange and red. In the distance, she could see Krath soldiers moving through the colony, still hunting, still killing. Storm growled a question. Hana took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Find them, she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. Hunt them. Kill any who fight. Leave none who would harm our family. Cubs did not hesitate. They vanished into the night, and the screaming began. Warlord Drex had conquered 47 worlds in his long and bloody career. He had burned cities and broken armies and made kings kneel before him. He commanded 6 warships and 3,000 soldiers, and he had never lost a battle. He had come to Theta 7 expecting an easy victory, a small human colony with outdated defenses and no military support. His scouts had reported that the only thing of value was a girl who had somehow bonded with Shadowmane cubs. The syndicate bosses wanted her alive, and they wanted the cubs either captured or killed for their valuable hide. Simple, clean profitables. Why were his soldiers dying? First reports came 30 minutes after the ground assault began. Squad 7 had gone silent during a sweep of the northern residential district. Drex assumed they had encountered heavy resistance and sent Squad 8 to support them. Squad 8 found pieces of Squad 7 scattered across 3 city blocks. There was no sign of the enemy. Drex felt the first cold touch of unease, but he pushed it aside. Humans were clever. They had probably set traps or used some kind of explosive. He ordered his troops to proceed with caution and continue the mission. Then Squad 12 vanished, then Squad 3, then Squad 15 reported movement in the shadows before their communications cut off in a burst of screaming. Drex stood in his command vehicle, surrounded by screens showing tactical data from across the battlefield. He watched as unit markers blinked from green to red, one after another. Something was hunting his soldiers, and it was fast. Show me visual feed, he ordered. The screens flickered and displayed helmet camera footage from a soldier in the Eastern District. The man was running through smoke-filled streets, his breathing ragged and terrified. Behind him, Drex could hear other soldiers shouting and firing their weapons. Then, something massive hit the camera soldier from the side. The feed spun wildly, showing flashes of black fur and glowing red eyes and claws that seemed to drink the light. Then there was a wet crunching sound, and the feed went dark. Shadowman's Drex whispered. His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Kor, stepped closer. Sir, our ground forces have lost contact. With over 200 soldiers in the last 20 minutes, we are being slaughtered. Rex slammed his fist against the console. That is impossible. Shadowmanes are animals. They do not coordinate attacks. They do not hunt in packs. Perhaps these ones do. The warlord stared at the tactical display, watching more unit markers turn red. A pattern was emerging. The attacks were not random. They were surgical. The creatures were targeting isolated squads, first cutting off units that strayed too far from the main force. Then they moved inward, pushing his soldiers toward the colony center. They were being herded. Rally all remaining forces to the main square, Drex commanded. Form a defensive perimeter with the heavy vehicles. Nothing gets through his soldiers. Obeyed. Within minutes, nearly 1,000 Krath warriors had assembled in the colony square. They positioned armored transports in a ring and set up heavy plasma cannons facing outward. Spotlights swept the surrounding buildings and soldiers stood, ready with weapons raised. "Let the beast come," Drex said, trying to project confidence. He did not feel we have enough firepower to kill 100. Shadowman, the minutes stretched into an hour, the fires burning throughout the colony cast dancing. Shadows across the square, but nothing attacked. The soldiers grew nervous. Their eyes darted from shadow to shadow, and their fingers tightened on triggers. Then someone shouted and pointed. A figure walked down the main street toward the square. Drex raised his optical enhancer and focused on the approaching shape. His blood turned cold when he saw what it was: a human girl. She could not have been older than 17. She had dark hair and dirt-stained clothes, and she walked with the casual confidence of someone taking a morning stroll. She was completely unarmed and completely alone. "This is what they sent against us." Drex laughed, but the sound was hollow. "The great terror that killed my soldiers as a child." The girl stopped about 50 meters from the perimeter. She stood in the middle of the street, with flames burning behind her and smoke swirling around her feet. Her eyes reflected the firelight, and there was something in them that made Drex uncomfortable, something old and cold and patient. "You have one chance," the girl called out. Her voice carried clearly across the silent square. "Leave this planet, never return." Drex stepped forward so she could see him. "I am Warlord Drex of the Krath Syndicate. I have conquered 47 worlds, and I do not take orders from children." The girl did not react to his words. She just stood there watching him with those strange eyes. "Your soldiers killed innocent people tonight," she said. "They burned homes. They took children. You have brought war to a place of peace, and I will take much more before I am done." Drex raised his plasma rifle and aimed at her chest. "Starting with you, I am going to give you one more chance," the girl said, "because I am trying to be better than you. Walk away. Let the captives go. Leave and never come back." Drex laughed again, and this time his soldiers joined him. 1,000 warriors mocking a single teenage girl. "I think I will take my chances," he said, and his finger tightened on the trigger. He never got to Firestorm hit him from the left side, moving so fast that Drex did not even see it coming. One moment he was standing with his weapon raised. The next moment he was on the ground, and a 12-foot predator was standing over him with claws pressed against his throat. The square erupted into chaos. Ember came from the right, tearing through soldiers like they were made of paper. Her claws flashed in the firelight, and everywhere she moved, bodies fell. The heavy plasma cannons tried to track her, but she was too fast, too unpredictable. She leaped from vehicle to vehicle, leaving destruction in her wake. Ghost appeared from nowhere and everywhere at once. Soldiers fired into shadows only to be struck from behind. They formed defensive circles only to find the creature already inside with them. They ran only to discover that running made them easier targets. The Krath army that had conquered 47 worlds fell apart, and Minuti's Drex lay pinned beneath. Storm, unable to move, unable to breathe. The creature's weight pressed down on him, and its breath was hot against his face. Its eyes burned crimson, and its teeth were very, very close to his throat. Then the girl appeared. She walked through the carnage as if it was not happening. Soldiers ran past her screaming and dying, and she did not flinch. She stepped over bodies and around burning vehicles until she stood directly in front of Drex. "He gave you a chance," she said. Rex wanted to beg for mercy, but his pride would not allow it. So instead, he spat at her feet. "You think you have won. You are just a girl with some pets. The Syndicate will send more ships, more soldiers. They will burn this whole planet to ash," maybe Hana said. "But you will not be here to see it." She looked at Storm, the Shadowmane. Growled a question. Hana thought for a long moment. She thought about Mrs. Patterson. She thought about the children in slave ships. She thought about every innocent person who had died tonight because of this man and his army. "Finish it," she said. "Storm, Albeit the battle lasted less than an hour, by the end, nearly every craft soldier on the ground was dead. The few survivors threw down their weapons and surrendered, hoping for mercy. Some of them received it. The ones who had hurt children did not. Hana stood in the center of the square, surrounded by death and destruction. Her cubs gathered around her, their fur matted with blood and their breathing heavy. They had fought harder than they ever had before, and they were exhausted, but they had one captain. Hayes limped into the square, supported by David Park and several other colonists. They stopped at the edge of the carnage, staring in disbelief at what they saw. Hannah turned to look at them, and the hardness in her eyes softened. She was just a girl. Again, tired and scared and desperate to be held. Her father pushed past everyone and ran to her. He wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. And he did not care that she was covered in blood and ash. He just held his daughter and cried, "It's over." She whispered, "It's over." But even as she said the words, she knew they were not entirely true. The Krath warships still orbited above. The Syndicate bosses would want revenge. The galaxy now knew what she could do, and they would come for her at night. She had become something more than human. She had become a legend, and legends never got to rest. Ambassador Talveen watched from his shuttle in orbit as the Krath warships burned. He had seen many things in his 300 years of life, but nothing like this. The 6 warships that had seemed so threatening just hours ago were now drifting. Hulks, their engines were dead. Their weapons were silent. Great tears in their hulls showed where something had torn through metal and machinery. With impossible strength, the Shadowmanes had not stayed on the ground after the battle in the colony. Square, the 3 cubs had scaled the space elevator that connected Theta 7 to its orbital station. From there, they had somehow boarded the Krath vessels and systematically destroyed them from the inside. Talveen had watched the sensor feeds in horrified fascination as the creatures moved through corridors designed for much smaller beings, tearing through bulkheads and soldiers with equal ease. Now it was over. The Krath fleet was destroyed. Their ground forces were dead or captured. Their warlord had been torn apart by the very creatures he had come to hunt, and in the center of the ruined colony, Square, a 17-year-old girl, sat with 3 massive predators curled around her tall. Veen ordered his shuttle to descend. The colony was in ruins. Fires still burned in some districts, and the streets were littered with debris and bodies. But already the humans were working to rebuild. People cleared rubble and tended to the wounded and organized supplies with a calm efficiency that Talveen found remarkable. They had just survived an attack that would have broken most species, and they were already thinking about tomorrow. He found Hana exactly where he had seen her from orbit. She sat on the edge of the fountain in the main square, the same fountain where he had first watched her play with her cubs just days ago. Storm lay beside her with its head in her lap. Ember and Ghost flanked her on either side, their eyes closed in exhaustion. Hana was crying. Talveen approached, slowly keeping his hands visible. The Shadowmanes opened their eyes when he got close, but they did not move. They recognized him from before, and they could sense that he meant no harm. "May I sit?" he asked. Hana nodded without looking up. The ambassador lowered himself onto the fountain edge, maintaining a respectful distance. He looked out at the devastated square and the humans working among the wreckage, and he tried to find words for what he was feeling. "You saved them," he finally said. "All of them." Hana shook her head. "I killed people tonight. Lots of people. They were raiders and slavers." Talveen said, "They would have killed or captured everyone in this colony." I know. Hana's voice was small and broken, but I still did it. I told Storm and Ember and Ghost to hunt, and they hunted. I told them to kill, and they killed. Those soldiers were evil, but they were still alive, and I ended that. She looked up at him, and her eyes were red from crying. "Does that make me evil too?" Talveen considered the question carefully. He had lived long enough to know that simple answers were rarely true answers in my culture. He said, "We have a concept called the weight of necessity. It means that sometimes good people must do terrible things to protect what they love. The weight of those actions stays with them forever. It changes them, it marks them, but it does not make them evil. He gestured at the humans working around them. Carry the weight now. These people do not have to carry it. You took that burden so they could live. That is not evil. That is sacrifice. Hana was quiet for a long time. She stroked Storm's fur absently, and the massive predator made a soft rumbling sound of comfort. They trust me, she said finally. Storm and Ember and Ghost. They trust me completely. When I told them to hunt, they did not hesitate. When I told them to kill, they obeyed. They would do anything I asked. She looked down at her hands. What if I ask for something wrong someday? What if I become the kind of person who uses that trust for bad things? Then you will have lost something precious, Talvin said. But the fact that you are asking that question tells me you never will. The truly dangerous beings are the ones who never question their own power at commotion. At the edge of the square drew their attention. Director Michelle Torres was walking toward them, followed by Captain Hayes and several council members. They looked exhausted and battered, but there was something new in their eyes when they looked at Hannah. It was respect. Director Torres stopped a few meters away and gave Hannah a formal nod. Miss Park, on behalf of the Colony Council, I want to thank you. What you did tonight saved hundreds of lives. Hannah shifted uncomfortably. I just did what I had to do. You did far more than that, Captain Hayes said. He still had bandages around his chest from his wound, but he stood straight and tall. You turned the tide of a battle that we had already lost. You gave our people hope when there was none. Talvin stood and addressed the council members. I will be sending a full report to the hegemony about what happened here tonight. I want you to know that this report will include my strongest recommendation that Theta 7 be granted protected status. No species should be allowed to threaten this colony. Again, the council members exchanged surprised looks. Protected status was rarely granted, and it came with significant benefits. Military support, trade agreements, diplomatic recognition. Why would you do that? Director Torres asked. Because Talvin looked at Hannah and her cubs. Humanity has shown the galaxy something important tonight. You have shown that the most dangerous creatures in the universe can become the most loyal protectors when they are treated with kindness. That is a lesson worth protecting. Over the following weeks, Talvin kept his promise. His report spread through the galactic network, and suddenly everyone knew about Theta 7. Everyone knew about the human colony that had survived a Krath assault. Everyone knew about the girl who commanded. Shadowman as delegans arrived from a dozen species, all wanting to meet Hannah and study her bond with the cubs. Scientists proposed theories about pheromones and telepathy and genetic compatibility. But Hannah knew the truth was simpler than any of their explanations. She had loved them, and they had loved her back. That was a year after the attack. Hannah stood on the northern ridge, where she had first found her cubs. The den was still there, though nature had begun to reclaim it. Vines grew over the fallen rocks, and small animals had made homes in the shadow storm. Ember and Ghost stood beside her, fully grown now and more magnificent than ever. Their fur gleamed in the light of the twin suns, and their eyes held the wisdom of creatures who had seen battle and survived. We started here, Hannah said, running her hand along Storm's shoulder. 3 scared orphans and 1 stubborn girl. Storm made a sound that might have been agreement. Hannah smiled. Look at us now. She turned and looked back at the colony spread out below. The buildings had been rebuilt better than before. The population had grown as more humans arrived, drawn by the legend of the Shadowmane girl. New partnerships had formed with alien species who wanted to learn humanity's secret. They would never fully understand, Hannah thought. Humans were not special because they were clever or strong. Humans were special because they refused to see monsters. They looked at creatures that terrified the entire galaxy, and they saw potential friends. That was humanity's gift. Hannah started walking down the ridge, and her cubs followed as they always had, as they always would. She did not know what the future held, There would be more challenges, more enemies, more difficult choices. The galaxy was vast and dangerous and full of beings who would want to use her or destroy her. But she had her family, and together they could face anything far away on the Valorian. Homeworld Ambassador Talveen stood before the High Council delivering his final report about humanity. When he finished, the council leader asked him a question that had been bothering her for months. Why do the monsters follow the humans? She asked. What is their secret? Talveen remembered a crying girl surrounded by apex predators. He remembered the way those creatures had looked at her with absolute devotion. He remembered watching humanity turn enemies into allies through nothing more than kindness, because he said slowly, humans do not see monsters. They see family. They look at the most terrifying creatures in the universe, and they offer friendship. And somehow, against all logic and reason, that friendship is returned. The council was silent. Talveen continued. Perhaps that is what makes them the most dangerous species of all. Not their weapons or their technology or their numbers, but their ability to make anything love them. He paused, and his skin shifted to the deep blue of certainty. We should be grateful they choose to use that power for good. On Theta 7, Hannah sat in the colony square throwing a ball for Ghost, while Storm and Ember dozed in the afternoon sun. Children ran and played nearby, no longer afraid of the massive predators. In their midst, an old woman brought Hannah a cup of tea and thanked her for the 100th time for saving her grandchildren. Hannah smiled and accepted the tea and watched her cubs play and felt at peace. She was not a hero or a legend or a weapon. She was just a girl who had found some orphans and decided to love them, and in the end, that had been enough to change the galaxy. The most dangerous predators in the universe had found something more powerful than claws and teeth and killing instinct. Had found a human to call their own, and they would follow her anywhere,